The searing Pacific sand pressed against flesh as consciousness wavered. An American uniform, soaked through with seawater, clung to trembling limbs. Waves crashed repeatedly over the exhausted form, sprawling at water's edge. Hidden within a waterlogged pocket lay evidence that could have meant instant death. Words scrawled in desperation told of failure and shame. The emperor had been dishonored. 10,000 generations would bear this disgrace. Only death could restore what had been lost. Salt spray stung swollen eyes. Through blurred vision, metal glinted in morning light. An American rifle barrel pointed downward. A soldier stood silhouetted against dawn sky. Eyes squeezed shut. The final moment had arrived. Death would end the unbearable shame. Instead, unexpected words shattered everything. Safety was promised. Medical help was coming. Corporal David Akwai from the 298th Infantry had just made history. The first Japanese prisoner in American custody lay gasping on Hawaiian sand. This moment would reshape everything both men believed about their enemies. What followed challenged every assumption about warfare, honor, and humanity itself. Neither soldier understood they were witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. A systematic transformation would unfold over the next 4 years. American treatment of Japanese prisoners would demolish decades of military indoctrination through the most unexpected weapon imaginable: simple human kindness. The scale was unprecedented. Between Pearl Harbor and surrender, approximately 5,000 Japanese soldiers would find themselves in American prisoner of war camps. Thousands more would experience Allied custody in Australia and New Zealand. Total numbers reached between 35 and 50,000 across all Western Allied forces. These figures seem small considering the Pacific War's massive scale. Yet each capture represented something almost impossible, according to Japanese military doctrine. Every single prisoner had expected torture. Everyone anticipated brutal execution. Everyone prepared for agonizing death. American camps would deliver something else entirely. Hot showers flowed daily. 3 full meals appeared without fail. Medical care exceeded what many had received as free soldiers. Geneva Convention protections were observed meticulously. This treatment created psychological devastation more complete than any physical torture could achieve. The devastation came not from cruelty, but from kindness they could neither comprehend nor initially accept. Japanese military culture was absolute in its demands. Death before dishonor wasn't mere slogan, but sacred commandment. Victory or total destruction were the only acceptable outcomes. Surrender was literally impossible for true warriors. The 1941 field manual distributed to every Japanese soldier contained 0 instructions for prisoner status. Such circumstances were considered inconceivable. True Japanese warriors died fighting or committed ritual suicide rather than accept capture alive. This wasn't propaganda designed to motivate troops. This was spiritual programming encoded into every serviceman's soul from enlistment's first day. Naval Academy training reminded cadets constantly that their lives belonged entirely to the Emperor. Personal survival meant nothing compared to honor. Surrender represented more than military failure. It was spiritual contamination that would curse ancestors and descendants alike through eternity. American military culture could not have been more different. While American soldiers learned Geneva Convention rights and prisoner treatment protocols, Japanese soldiers were programmed to expect torture and death. Japanese training included horrific descriptions of supposed American atrocities. Stories circulated of prisoners being skinned alive, used for medical experiments, or consumed by cannibalistic Americans. These tales were presented as documented fact, not speculation. The irony was devastating. While Japanese soldiers expected American barbarism, their own military was committing documented atrocities across the Pacific. The Bataan Death March had forced 60,000 Filipino and 15,000 American prisoners to march 65 miles through tropical heat without food or water. Thousands died from this deliberate cruelty. Japanese treatment of Allied prisoners would ultimately kill 27% of Western captives. By comparison, only 4% of Allied prisoners died in German and Italian camps. Yet when the first Japanese prisoner awakened in a clean Hawaiian hospital bed, American doctors were treating his injuries with professional care. American nurses brought regular meals. American officers addressed him with military courtesy normally reserved for fellow soldiers. The cognitive dissonance was unbearable. Requests for suicide were denied with incomprehensible patience. Every assumption about American savagery collapsed daily. March 9, 1942, brought the next phase of transformation. The journey from Hawaii to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin introduced concepts that Japanese military training had declared impossible. Not cattle cars or freight wagons, but passenger trains with cushioned seats carried prisoners across America. Armed guards were present, yes, but regular meals were served 3 times daily without fail. Through train windows, an America emerged that couldn't exist according to everything taught in Japan. Cities blazed with electric lights despite ongoing war. No blackout curtains darkened windows. No air raid precautions were visible anywhere. No signs of total war mobilization that had consumed Japan since 1937 appeared anywhere. Civilians moved about their daily business as if Pearl Harbor had been a distant inconvenience, rather than the devastating blow Japanese propaganda claimed it was. Camp McCoy sprawled across 60,000 acres of Wisconsin countryside. Its vastness alone stunned prisoners accustomed to cramped island living. Originally built as a training facility, the camp had been hastily converted for prisoner housing as Pacific Theater captures began arriving. By 1944, multiple nationalities were housed there. Germans, Italians, and Japanese occupied separate compounds. Camp Commandant Colonel Harold Rogers had received specific instructions from Washington that would test his personal resolve daily. Japanese prisoners were to receive strict Geneva Convention treatment, regardless of how Japan treated American prisoners. Rogers later admitted this was among the hardest orders he ever followed, knowing what was happening to American boys in Japanese camps. The Japanese occupied Compound 3, separated from Germans and Italians by double fences topped with barbed wire. Each barrack housed 50 men in individual bunks with mattresses, sheets, and blankets. Such luxury exceeded imagination for soldiers who had slept on cave floors throughout the Pacific. Buildings featured electric lights, hot water, flush toilets, and central heating that maintained comfort through Wisconsin's brutal winters. The camp hospital particularly astounded Japanese medical personnel among the prisoners. Unlike desperate shortages experienced in combat zones, McCoy's medical facilities included X-ray machines, surgical equipment, and adequate medication supplies. The new wonder drug penicillin was available when needed. Nothing challenged Japanese military indoctrination more directly than daily meals. 3 times each day, Japanese prisoners received portions exceeding what Japanese civilians had seen since 1940. Daily rations of 2,800 calories matched what American soldiers received. Meat, vegetables, bread, butter, coffee, and occasional desserts appeared regularly. The Japanese compound even received rice and soy sauce after administrators learned about Japanese dietary preferences. This accommodation, enemies adjusting meals for prisoner comfort, created psychological crisis among the captives. In Japanese military culture, soldiers regularly starved while officers ate well. Here, prisoners were actually asked about food preferences. The camp kitchen became a source of particular amazement. Japanese prisoners assigned to cooking duties discovered electric mixers, industrial refrigerators, and gas stoves capable of preparing meals for thousands. The technology was decades ahead of anything in Japan. More disturbing was the waste. Food was discarded daily because regulations required preparing extra portions to ensure adequate supplies for everyone. One of the most profound challenges to Japanese military ideology came from an unexpected source. The camp chapel not only permitted but actively encouraged prisoners to practice their religious beliefs. A Buddhist shrine was established, complete with incense provided by the Young Men's Christian Association. American Christians were actually supplying materials for Buddhist worship by enemy soldiers. Japanese prisoners were allowed daily services, Buddhist holiday celebrations, and funeral rites for the few prisoners who died from illness or injury. This respect for enemy religious practices contradicted everything they had been told about American cultural barbarism. Even more shocking was the presence of Japanese-American soldiers serving as interpreters and guards. These Nisei soldiers, many from the 442nd Regimental Combat Team and Military Intelligence Service, were Americans of Japanese descent whose own families were imprisoned in internment camps. Yet these men served their country with distinction, while their relatives suffered behind barbed wire elsewhere. Summer 1944 brought labor shortages to American agriculture, leading to Japanese prisoners working on farms across Wisconsin, Michigan, and Iowa. Unlike slave labor that Japanese forces extracted from Allied prisoners building the Burma Railway, where 12,000 Allied prisoners died, American authorities paid Japanese prisoners 80 cents per day for their work. This was the same rate paid to German and Italian prisoners. Work details revealed American agricultural abundance that defied Japanese comprehension. Single Wisconsin farms produced more food than entire Japanese prefectures. Mechanical harvesters, electric milking machines, and automated feed systems demonstrated technology that made one American farmer as productive as dozens of Japanese peasants. Relationships between Japanese prisoners and American farmers evolved from mutual suspicion to surprising cordiality. Many farmers had sons fighting in the Pacific, yet they treated Japanese prisoners with basic human decency. Lunch was shared regularly. Farming techniques were taught patiently. Sometimes prisoners were invited for dinner, despite regulations against fraternization. Late 1944 brought educational programs to Camp McCoy. Japanese prisoners could study English, American history, mathematics, and basic sciences. The camp library, stocked with books in multiple languages including Japanese, became refuge for intellectually starved soldiers, forbidden to read anything but military manuals for years. Vocational training programs were offered. Some Japanese prisoners took English classes that would prove invaluable in post-war Japan. Access to American newspapers and magazines, even with wartime censorship, provided windows into democratic society that contradicted years of totalitarian propaganda. Christmas 1944 at Camp McCoy produced psychological crisis among Japanese prisoners that shattered their remaining worldview assumptions. American church groups, civic organizations, and individual families sent Christmas packages to the camp. These packages included gifts for Japanese prisoners who followed Buddhism or Shintoism and didn't celebrate Christmas at all. Each Japanese prisoner received packages containing cigarettes, candy, toiletries, warm socks, and hand-knitted scarves. The gifts came with cards, many clearly written by children, expressing hope for peace and the prisoners' safe return to their families. Christmas dinner defied all comprehension. Turkey, ham, stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, cranberry sauce, and pies appeared in quantities that Japan hadn't seen since before the First World War. Japanese prisoners were invited to attend Christmas services in the chapel, though few initially did. Those who attended out of curiosity heard prayers for peace and for all soldiers' safe return home, including enemies. The presence of German prisoners in adjacent compounds provided Japanese prisoners with challenging perspectives for comparison. Germans moved freely within their compounds, organized sports leagues, performed theatrical productions, published camp newspapers, and generally treated captivity as inconvenience rather than shame. The contrast was stark and disturbing. While Japanese prisoners initially refused to give their names, providing only serial numbers, Germans chatted freely with guards, wrote letters home, and made plans for post-war life. The Germans' casual acceptance of prisoner status, without apparent shame or suicidal ideation, gradually influenced Japanese prisoners. Inter-compound sports competitions, carefully supervised, brought Japanese prisoners into contact with German and Italian prisoners. These interactions demonstrated that prisoner status was considered normal in Western military culture, not the ultimate dishonor Japanese military ideology proclaimed it to be. Perhaps no single factor challenged Japanese military indoctrination more than male privileges. Japanese prisoners were encouraged to write home through the International Red Cross, though most initially refused. They believed their families thought them dead, which was the only honorable fate for captured soldiers. The camp administration's persistence in explaining male rights gradually wore down resistance. When the first Japanese prisoners began receiving replies from their families in early 1945, the psychological impact rippled through the entire compound like earthquake tremors. Families expressed joy at their survival, not shame at their capture. Soon dozens of Japanese prisoners were writing home regularly. American censors who had to approve all letters were remarkably lenient, allowing prisoners to describe camp conditions, their health, and their daily activities. This transparency, enemies allowing honest communication about treatment, contradicted Japanese assumptions about American deception and secrecy. April 1945 brought news of American forces invading Okinawa. Japanese prisoners at Camp McCoy learned of the battle through American newspapers available in the library. The coverage was detailed, including American casualties and setbacks. This demonstrated press freedom incomprehensible in totalitarian Japan, where only victories were ever reported to the public. More shocking were reports of American efforts to protect Okinawan civilians. While Japanese military propaganda claimed Americans would rape and murder all civilians, newspaper accounts described Marine units risking casualties to evacuate civilians from combat zones. Military doctors were treating wounded Japanese civilians. Engineers were providing clean water to refugee camps. When Okinawan civilians began arriving at mainland camps after being captured, their testimonies contradicted Japanese military claims that Americans would commit genocide against Japanese populations. These first-hand accounts from fellow Japanese further eroded military indoctrination. August 6, 1945, brought news that would change everything. The atomic bombing of Hiroshima was reported immediately in American newspapers available to prisoners. Japanese prisoners' first reaction was complete disbelief. No single bomb could possibly destroy an entire city. When Nagasaki followed 3 days later, the reality became undeniable. The psychological impact was complex and devastating. Horror at the destruction mixed with awe at American technological superiority. Surprisingly, relief emerged that the war would end without the anticipated invasion of Japan that would have killed millions more. Most profound was the American reaction. Not celebration, but sobering reflection on what they had unleashed. Camp authorities held special services after the atomic bombings. Chaplains prayed for the victims and expressed hope that such weapons would never be used again. This enemy mourning for enemy dead shattered final remnants of propaganda about American barbarism. August 15, 1945 brought Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast, which reached Camp McCoy through translations in American newspapers. For Japanese prisoners who had been captured believing the war would continue until every Japanese was dead, the surrender created existential crisis. The American reaction astounded them even further. No gloating appeared anywhere. No abuse of suddenly defenseless prisoners occurred. No reduction in food or privileges was implemented. If anything, camp authorities seemed more concerned about prisoner welfare than before. Suicide watches were instituted. Additional counseling was provided. Colonel Rogers addressed the Japanese compounds personally, with Nisei interpreters translating his words. The war was over. They would go home when transportation could be arranged. Until then, they remained under American protection. Any guard who mistreated prisoners would be court-martialed immediately. They had come as enemies. They would leave as future friends. Fall 1945 brought unexpected challenges that no one had anticipated. Many Japanese prisoners, particularly those captured early in the war, feared returning to Japan. They had been transformed by their experience and educated in different ways of thinking. They knew they would return to a destroyed nation that might reject them as contaminated by survival when honor demanded death. The camp administration instituted repatriation preparation programs to address these concerns. Japanese prisoners received vocational training in skills needed for reconstruction. Construction, electrical work, modern agriculture, and basic medical training were offered. The American military, having defeated Japan, was now training Japanese prisoners to rebuild their homeland. Japanese prisoners were given surplus clothing, shoes, and basic supplies for their return journey. Each received money for their journey home. These were funds from the nation that had defeated them, provided to help them start new lives in peace. The journey home began in December 1945. Japanese prisoners were transported by train to West Coast ports, then by ship to Japan. The cross-country train journey became their farewell to American abundance. Cities were rebuilding from war production to consumer goods. Farms were preparing for peaceful harvests. Families were reuniting with returning soldiers everywhere. At San Francisco, Japanese prisoners boarded ships for Japan, alongside American occupation troops heading to the same destination. The surreal nature of former enemies traveling together to rebuild Japan created unique shipboard dynamics. Occupiers and returnees shared the same vessels heading to the same destination for opposite purposes. The Pacific crossing took 2 weeks of reflection. Japanese prisoners spent the time preparing for return to a homeland they knew was completely destroyed. Many wrote letters to American friends during the voyage, farmers they had worked for, teachers who had educated them, and even guards who had shown kindness received farewell correspondence. These letters, preserved in various archives, reveal profound psychological changes that had occurred. Arriving at Yokohama in January 1946, Japanese prisoners encountered a homeland more devastated than their worst fears had imagined. Cities were nothing but ash and rubble. Populations were literally starving. American occupation forces controlled absolutely everything. The returning prisoners, healthy and well-fed from American camps, stood out starkly against the skeletal survivors of the Japanese homeland. The contrast was shocking and heartbreaking. Reception was mixed and often painful. Some families welcomed survivors with joy and tears. Others reacted with shame and disappointment. Military authorities, even in total defeat, often treated returned prisoners as contaminations. Several reported being told to commit suicide to cleanse their dishonor from family names. But American occupation authorities, recognizing the value of prisoners who understood American culture, often employed them as interpreters and advisors. Many returned prisoners found themselves serving as cultural bridges during the occupation. Their English skills, understanding of American customs, and lack of militant hostility made them valuable to both occupation forces and Japanese communities trying to navigate defeat and reconstruction. Returned prisoners became unexpected agents of Japanese democratization and modernization. Their exposure to American agricultural techniques, industrial methods, and democratic principles positioned them as valuable resources for reconstruction. Many rose to prominence in post-war Japan precisely because they understood the occupier's mindset and methods. The first prisoner captured exemplified this trajectory perfectly. After returning to Japan, he joined Toyota Motor Corporation, using his English skills and American understanding to help build Japan's automotive export industry. By 1969, he had become president of Toyota's Brazilian subsidiary, a career impossible without his prisoner experience. He retired in 1987 and lived until 1999, rarely speaking about the war publicly. In 1991, he attended a historical conference where he was reunited with his submarine, now displayed in a Texas museum. The emotional reunion was broadcast internationally. Former prisoners introduced American farming techniques that revolutionized Japanese agriculture after the war. Others established businesses using American models they had observed. They taught English and Western customs to new generations. They advised government ministries on democratic reforms. Most importantly, they testified that Americans were not the demons of wartime propaganda, but potential partners in building lasting peace. The educational opportunities Japanese prisoners experienced in American camps influenced Japan's post-war education revolution. Former prisoners who had studied in camp libraries understood education's role in democracy and economic development. They became advocates for educational reform and international exchange. The camp experience of reading uncensored newspapers influenced Japan's post-war press freedom significantly. Several former prisoners became journalists in occupied Japan, advocating for the transparency they had witnessed in American media available to prisoners. The exposure to different ways of thinking and organizing society helped former prisoners contribute to Japan's remarkable post-war transformation from militaristic empire to democratic nation. Their experiences bridged the gap between defeat and reconstruction in ways no one had anticipated. The most profound impact of the American prisoner experience was moral rather than material or political. Japanese soldiers taught that mercy was weakness, discovered that American strength came partially from moral confidence. The ability to treat enemies humanely without fearing it would undermine victory was revolutionary to their thinking. This moral dimension emerged repeatedly in post-war accounts and interviews. Former prisoners struggled to articulate how American kindness had been more devastating to their worldview than cruelty would have been. Cruelty would have confirmed propaganda completely. Kindness destroyed it entirely and permanently. The treatment contrast with Japanese handling of Allied prisoners created particular anguish for returned prisoners. As details emerged about Bataan, the Burma Railway, and systematic prisoner abuse, former Japanese prisoners who had experienced American humanity struggled with national shame and personal transformation. One unexpected aspect of camp life that influenced returned prisoners was observing American women's wartime roles. Female nurses, administrators, and support staff at camps demonstrated women's capabilities beyond Japanese social restrictions. Some prisoners worked on farms where women operated machinery and managed operations while men fought overseas. This exposure to different gender roles influenced some returned prisoners' views on women's place in society. Having observed that American productivity partially stemmed from utilizing the entire population's capabilities regardless of gender, they brought these observations back to a Japan that would undergo its own gender revolution in subsequent decades. Beyond agricultural and industrial techniques, Japanese prisoners absorbed American organizational methods and systematic approaches to solving problems. The camp experience demonstrated that American efficiency came not from individual superiority, but from systems and procedures that could be learned and adapted. The American approach to mechanical maintenance particularly impressed Japanese prisoners accustomed to equipment being used until total destruction. Camp vehicles and machinery received regular preventive maintenance, scheduled oil changes, parts replacement before failure, and systematic inspection schedules. These observations influenced Japanese industrial practices significantly in the post-war period. The famous Japanese emphasis on quality control and preventive maintenance traced directly to prisoner observations. Religious freedom in American camps influenced Japan's post-war religious landscape in unexpected ways. Buddhist prisoners who had practiced freely in camps returned supporting religious tolerance and separation of religion from state power. These were radical concepts in state Shinto Japan, where religion and government were inseparably linked. The Christmas kindness from American Christians particularly influenced returned prisoners' views on Christianity. While few actually converted, many developed deep respect for Christian charity they had experienced firsthand. This helped ease tensions during occupation when American missionaries arrived in Japan seeking converts. Letters from home that Japanese prisoners received in camps revealed family attitudes that contradicted military propaganda about shameful surrender. Wives expressed joy at survival rather than shame at capture. Parents preferred living sons to dead heroes. Children wanted fathers regardless of military honor or dishonor. These communications revolutionized prisoners' understanding of family versus state loyalty priorities. Returned prisoners often prioritized family over career advancement, unusual in Japanese corporate culture. Their American experience had shown them that family men could be successful professionals. American farmers and guards spoke constantly of families, displayed photos proudly, and planned for post-war reunions. This family focus wasn't weakness, but actually strength that contributed to effectiveness. American military psychologists studied Japanese prisoners extensively throughout the war. Research that influenced post-war occupation policies significantly. These studies revealed systematic psychological changes among Japanese prisoners exposed to humane treatment and different ways of thinking. Research showed that Japanese prisoners arrived with death before dishonor conditioning so intense that many required suicide prevention for months. Yet prolonged exposure to humane treatment, educational opportunities, and different perspectives produced remarkable changes in worldview. These studies influenced occupation education reforms, land redistribution policies, and democratic constitution implementation. MacArthur's staff included former camp administrators who understood Japanese psychology through prisoner observation. This knowledge helped avoid occupation mistakes that might have triggered widespread resistance to democratic reforms. Several of Japan's post-war business innovations traced directly to prisoner observations of American methods. The famous Toyota production system incorporated efficiency concepts learned during captivity. Waste reduction, continuous improvement, and worker respect became hallmarks of Japanese manufacturing. The convenience store concept that revolutionized Japanese retail originated partly from observations of American camp exchanges. Small stores providing diverse goods efficiently impressed prisoners accustomed to specialized shops with limited selections. These American models, first seen in captivity, influenced Japanese business development for decades. Returned prisoners became crucial cultural interpreters during occupation and beyond. Their unique experience of seeing America from inside while maintaining Japanese identity made them valuable for both societies, navigating from enmity to alliance. These cultural bridges extended far beyond official diplomatic channels. Some returned prisoners maintained correspondence with American camp staff, farmers, and families who had shown kindness. These personal connections, documented in various archives, reveal grassroots reconciliation preceding official government alliance between former enemies. Returned prisoners faced unique challenges regarding veteran status in post-war Japan. Japanese military authorities often denied them benefits, considering surrender dishonorable regardless of circumstances. This discrimination continued for decades, with prisoners excluded from veteran organizations and military commemorations. The irony was bitter beyond words. Men who had gained valuable experience and connections that helped rebuild Japan were officially dishonored for surviving, when honor supposedly demanded death. Only in the 1970s did Japanese prisoner associations finally form, advocating for recognition and sharing suppressed wartime experiences. These associations eventually gained official recognition, particularly after Emperor Hirohito's death in 1989 removed imperial-era stigma. Former prisoners began speaking publicly about their experiences, contributing to Japanese understanding of wartime history and American relations. Children of returned prisoners often exhibited unusual characteristics in conformist Japanese society. They questioned authority more readily. They valued individual expression over group harmony. They pursued international careers rather than traditional domestic employment. These second-generation effects suggested deep psychological changes in returned prisoners that influenced family dynamics permanently. Grandchildren of prisoners showed even stronger international orientation. Many studied abroad, particularly in America, drawn by family stories of unexpected kindness from former enemies. These educational exchanges, rooted in prisoner experiences, strengthened Japanese-American relations across generations. Post-war Japanese academics studied the prisoner experience as a unique window into American society and Japanese psychology. Research revealed consistent patterns among returnees: initial death wish upon capture, gradual acceptance of survival as possibility, hunger for education and learning. Worldview changes through exposure to different ideas. Return anxiety about acceptance by Japanese society. This research influenced Japanese military education reform, eliminating death before dishonor indoctrination and incorporating Geneva Convention training. Understanding how military indoctrination could be overcome through humane treatment provided insights into human psychology and social transformation. American scholars also studied Japanese prisoner experiences extensively, recognizing their unique value for understanding psychological indoctrination and transformation processes. These studies contributed to broader understanding of how deeply held beliefs could be changed through experience rather than argument alone. The 50th anniversary of World War II's end in 1995 brought renewed attention to prisoner experiences from both nations. Joint Japanese-American commemorations included former prisoner testimonies about unexpected American kindness that helped transform enemies into allies. These events helped both nations understand their shared history's complexity and the human connections that transcended wartime hatred. The first prisoner's 1991 return to America for a historical conference created particular media attention worldwide. The first Japanese prisoner meeting his submarine, now a museum display after 50 years, provided powerful visual metaphor for transformation from war to peace. His emotional reaction, broadcast internationally, humanized historical enemies for new generations who had never experienced wartime hatred firsthand. These commemorations helped younger generations understand how former enemies became allies through human connections, forged even in captivity's difficult circumstances. The story of Japanese prisoners expecting cruelty but receiving kindness became part of the larger narrative of post-war reconciliation. Today, descendants of Japanese prisoners and American camp personnel maintain connections initiated 80 years ago during wartime. While most original participants have passed away, their families continue celebrating the transformation from enmity to friendship. Various exchanges and commemorations keep these connections alive across generations. The Camp McCoy History Center maintains extensive Japanese prisoner archives today. Artifacts, letters, and photographs donated by former prisoners and their families provide researchers worldwide with primary sources about successful enemy rehabilitation through humane treatment. Educational exchanges between American and Japanese communities, some rooted in wartime prisoner experiences, continue strengthening bilateral relations today. Students learn how enemies became friends through kindness rather than conquest. This lesson maintains continued relevance for modern international conflicts and peace-building efforts. The numbers tell a remarkable story of successful prisoner treatment by any historical standard. Approximately 5,000 Japanese prisoners were held in camps on the U.S. mainland throughout the war. Between 35,000 and 50,000 total Japanese prisoners were captured by Western Allied forces, with most held in Australia and New Zealand facilities. Camp McCoy in Wisconsin served as the largest U.S. camp, housing a maximum of 3,000 Japanese prisoners at peak capacity. Other significant camps included Camp Kennedy in Rhode Island, Camp Clarinda in Iowa, and Angel Island in California. Daily rations provided 2,800 calories, exactly the same as U.S. soldiers received. Prisoner wages were 80 cents per day for agricultural labor performed. Mortality rates in U.S. camps were extremely low by any wartime standard. By comparison, 27% mortality rates plagued Allied prisoners in Japanese camps. Escape attempts were minimal, with most Japanese prisoners making no attempt to escape captivity. Post-war contact showed that many maintained correspondence with Americans they had met during imprisonment. The Japanese prisoner experience in America during World War II offers profound lessons about conflict resolution, enemy rehabilitation, and peace-building through humanity rather than vengeance. The success stemmed from principled adherence to international law, even when enemies violated those same laws horrifically against American prisoners. This asymmetric morality, treating enemies better than they treated Americans, proved strategically brilliant over time. Japanese prisoners returned home as inadvertent American ambassadors. Their testimonies about unexpected kindness undermined anti-American propaganda more effectively than any information campaign could have achieved. Economic benefits also proved substantial in the long term. Japan's post-war economic miracle partially stemmed from former prisoners introducing American methods and maintaining business connections. Several major Japanese corporations employed former prisoners specifically for their American knowledge and international connections. But beyond strategic and economic benefits lay deeper moral victory. America proved democracy's superiority through example rather than force alone. The transformation of Japanese prisoners from fanatic enemies to grateful allies demonstrated that kindness could achieve what violence couldn't accomplish. The story of Japanese prisoners expecting cruel treatment but receiving American kindness stands as testament to democracy's moral power over totalitarian indoctrination. These men arrived believing death was their only honorable option available. They left understanding that life, properly lived, could honor both personal dignity and international peace. Their transformation from Bushido warriors to democratic citizens proved that enemies need not remain enemies forever if treated with fundamental human decency. The kindness they experienced as prisoners became seeds of alliance that flourished into one of history's strongest international partnerships between former enemies. Modern Japan-US relations, built on former enmity transformed through humanity, demonstrate reconciliation's possibility even after the bitterest conflicts in human history. The camp chaplains who prayed for enemy dead, the farmers who shared lunch with prisoner workers, and the families who sent Christmas gifts to enemies represented something extraordinary. These ordinary Americans demonstrating extraordinary decency achieved what military victory alone couldn't accomplish. They achieved genuine transformation of hearts and minds through simple human kindness. Today, when international conflicts seem intractable and enemies appear irredeemable, the Japanese prisoner experience offers genuine hope for peaceful resolution. It proves that kindness can be stronger than cruelty in the long run. It demonstrates that mercy can achieve what force cannot. It shows that today's enemies can become tomorrow's allies if treated with dignity despite past enmity. The Japanese soldiers who expected torture but received kindness, who anticipated death but discovered life, who arrived as enemies but left as friends, remind us that transformation remains possible even in humanity's darkest moments. Their journey from attacking Pearl Harbor to rebuilding Japan with American assistance demonstrates that cycles of vengeance can be broken through principled humanity and moral courage. In the end, America's greatest victory in the Pacific War wasn't purely military conquest, but moral triumph over hatred and revenge. By treating Japanese prisoners with unexpected kindness, America conquered not just Japanese military forces, but won a deeper victory by proving that democratic values could transform even the most indoctrinated enemies. The approximately 5,000 Japanese prisoners who experienced American humanity on U.S. soil, along with thousands more in Allied camps, carried that transformative experience back to Japan after the war. They became seeds of democracy and friendship planted in formerly hostile soil. Their testimonies about American kindness, preserved in archives and memories, continue teaching that enemies need not remain enemies forever. Courage must exist to break hatred's cycle through unexpected grace and fundamental human decency. This historical episode deserves remembrance not as mere wartime curiosity, but as blueprint for transforming modern conflicts through principled humanitarian treatment. If Japanese soldiers programmed for death before dishonor could become democratic citizens through experienced kindness, then today's seemingly intractable enemies might also be transformed through principled humanity and patient moral example. The American guards who protected suicidal prisoners, the doctors who healed enemy wounded, the teachers who educated hostile students, and the chaplains who prayed for enemy souls represent something timeless. These ordinary people performing extraordinary kindness achieved lasting victory through moral courage that transcended military conquest alone. Their example continues inspiring generations, reminding us that true strength lies not in destroying enemies, but in transforming them through demonstrated virtue and consistent human decency. The Japanese prisoner's journey from expecting torture to experiencing kindness, from anticipating death to discovering life, from arriving as enemies to leaving as friends, demonstrates democracy's deepest strength. The ability to transform opponents through moral example, rather than brute force alone, creates lasting change that endures across generations. Their experience proves that mercy can achieve what might cannot, that kindness can conquer where cruelty inevitably fails to create lasting peace. The story ends not with conquest alone, but with genuine conversion of hearts and minds. Not with submission, but with willing transformation. Not with continued enmity, but with lasting friendship built on mutual respect. The Japanese soldiers who attacked Pearl Harbor and ended in American prisoner camps experienced something more powerful than military defeat alone. They experienced the transformative power of unexpected kindness that changed their understanding of strength, honor, and humanity itself forever. Their legacy continues flourishing in every Japanese-American business partnership, educational exchange, and strategic alliance that strengthens both nations today. The kindness shown to prisoners 80 years ago created human connections that transcended wartime hatred and built bridges between former enemies. These bridges strengthen with each passing generation, proving that humanity's best qualities can emerge triumphant even in war's worst moments. This transformation from bitter enemies to close allies through experienced kindness remains one of history's most remarkable achievements in international reconciliation and lasting peace.